Joining me now, Virginia Senator Tim Kaine, who serves on both the Senate Armed Services Committee and Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thank you, Shannon.
So prior to the action yesterday, you had introduced a war powers resolution. You want to put this to a vote in the Senate. My colleague, former federal prosecutor Andy McCarthy, has written at length about this over the last few days. He argues the current authorization of use of military force that's been in effect since 2001 has been used by presidents of both parties, gives this president authority to go after any entity that aided or abetted the attackers of 9/11. He says that's where Iran gets drawn in. He writes this: in terms of the AUMF, there's no doubt that Iran aided and abetted al-Qaeda as it planned and executed the 9/11 attacks, and that Iran harbored al-Qaeda in the aftermath of those attacks, which led to future acts of international terrorism against the U.S. The AUMF thus endows President Trump with legal authority. Again, he talks about presidents of both parties using it. Jonathan Turley, who will be on the show later, also writes that there are a lot of more recent direct attacks that Iran and its proxies have had on Americans. So why does that AUMF not work? Is it time to get rid of it?
Shannon, the Senate has already ruled that the 2001 AUMF does not cover action against Iran, because I filed a similar resolution a few years ago, and we had to battle this out before the parliamentarian. It's clear that there is no congressional authorization for Trump's war against Iran. And I have filed a resolution that I think will get a vote later this week. I thank Senator Schumer for pushing that we have a vote on this as soon as possible, and we will have all members of the Senate have to declare whether or not the U.S. should be at war with Iran. It's unconstitutional for a president to initiate a war like this without Congress. Every member of Congress needs to vote on this.
Okay, let me play something from one of your GOP colleagues last night. This is Senator Markwayne Mullin to that argument.
Underneath Article 2, it has been debated and had been put into court multiple times on what exactly the length of war powers have, with the president having to come to Congress before he committed troops. We didn't commit necessarily troops here, but it also goes on to say, according to court rulings, that if we are attacked, the commander-in-chief, not the president of the United States at the time, but now he becomes commander-in-chief, has the authority and the ability to protect Americans home and abroad if we feel threatened or attacked, including our assets. There is no question Iran has threatened us, and there is no question they have attacked us. This is well within the president's authority to be able to do just exactly what he's doing.
So, Senator, he'll be likely a no vote on your resolution. Do you think any other Republicans, though, cross the aisle with you?
Yes, we will have Republican votes. How many, I don't know. There's going to be a briefing on Tuesday. Look, America was lied into a war in 2002 against Iraq with a Republican administration giving us false information about Iraq's weapons program. I have grave concern that we're going down the same path. Donald Trump's own national security officials have stated that Iran was not close to having a nuclear weapon. And Shannon, just Friday night, the Israeli foreign minister said that its bombing campaign over the last 9 days had set back the Iranian nuclear program by at least 2 or 3 years. There was no imminent threat to the United States from this nuclear program. It was an offensive war of choice by a president without consultation with Congress. We're going to have the briefing this week. We'll have a vote. I know many Republicans will fall in line and say a president can do whatever he wants, but I hope members of the Senate and the House will take their Article 1 responsibility seriously and say, you didn't even notify us, much less get an authorization. The U.S. should not be at war without a vote of Congress.
Okay, I wonder, to your point about Israel inflicting so much damage on Iran's nuclear program, I want to read something from the Wall Street Journal's editorial board. They say that what the president did helped rid the world of a grave nuclear threat was a large step toward restoring U.S. deterrence. It creates an opportunity, they said, for more peace in the Middle East. But they note this: leaving Iran with a hardened nuclear enrichment facility after an Israeli military campaign would have been a recipe for maximum danger, all but asking Iran to sprint to the bomb. Your reaction?
That's an argument that you could make to Congress and have a debate in full view of the American people so they can decide whether they want to risk American lives for this, particularly with the Israeli foreign minister saying the program had been set back 2 or 3 years. There was no need for President Trump to rush this on his own. And again, we believe, as a member of the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee, I think some of what President Trump is saying about the Iranian nuclear program is directly contrary to what his own national security officials are saying and what Israeli officials are saying. But if they believe this is something we should do, great. Bring it to Congress in the way that the framers intended. Our framers did not believe in the old way that a king could order a nation to war. Instead, the framers gave the power to Congress so that we would have a debate in front of all the American public whose sons and daughters' lives could potentially be at risk. And that's the biggest worry I have this morning, the risk to American troops and citizens and diplomatic personnel in the region, the risk to regional stability. We thought taking out the Iraqi government was going to make the region safer. It made it worse. This could lead to more nuclear escalation. It could hurt the global economy, and it risks America's reputation that we are seen as the one that wants to tear up diplomacy and instead result to military power first.
Okay, so to the issue of whether or not there was a true impending threat with regard to the nuclear program, you know, the IAEA just weeks ago, the UN security watchdog on matters of nuclear issues, they issued a scathing report. They talked about the fact that there have been numerous violations by Iran dating back to 2019. They said they couldn't explain traces of nuclear material that had been found at undeclared sites. They were never given full access. They said there was extensive sanitization and the provision of inaccurate explanations about what was going on. That's not a conservative body. That's not a pro-Trump body, as you know, but they had grave concerns that Iran's program was potentially wildly far advanced beyond what they would ever be able to ascertain.
And Shannon, you mentioned the date correctly, 2019. There have been challenges since 2019. What happened before 2019? Donald Trump tore up the diplomatic deal that imposed limits on Iranian centrifuges, limits on Iranian enrichment activity, and imposed significant inspections on Iranian facilities. After Donald Trump chose to tear up a deal that was working, his own cabinet members said he should not tear up the deal. Yes, we all predicted Iran would race ahead and do things that they shouldn't. But the IAEA has never found that Iran was close to developing a nuclear weapon. The Israeli foreign minister and U.S. security officials also have not suggested that Iran was close to developing a nuclear weapon. Only President Trump and a few of his kind of acolytes are saying that. We'll get into it more when we have an all-senators briefing this week. But I was very struck, again, on Friday night when the Israeli foreign minister said, we've set him back 2 to 3 years. That allowed for time for the president to get the American public and Congress on board if it was a worthy mission. Instead, he chose to make it Trump's war on his own. And I fear deeply we're being misled about this, just as we were before we tragically got into a war with Iraq.
Well, he says his priority as the commander-in-chief is protecting the American public, our military, our civilians all around the world, and that this was a strike in his assessment. It was time to make. You'll have that briefing this week. You'll undoubtedly have some type of debate over the war powers as well. We will follow all of that closely and see where your colleagues come down as well. Senator, thank you for the time.
My state is a very pro-military state, and we're deeply opposed to another war in the Middle East.
All right, Senator, thank you.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.